Hello and welcome back to DCD Talks. My name is Zoe Turner and I'm a digital portfolio lead here at DCD. And today we are going to be talking about how power is no longer just a supply problem. And I'm so very pleased that Ramboll has partnered with us to have this discussion. And I'm even more pleased to be speaking with Michael Bergstrom, who is their Senior Manager of Energy Market Development at Ramboll. Thank you, Michael, so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thanks, Zoe. It's great to be here.
Now, to kick us off, obviously, power is a massive conversation for data centers, particularly in the current market. But before we go there, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your career journey so far, and your current role with Ramboll?
Sure. Yeah. I've been with Ramboll for about 3 years. My background is engineering and got an MBA a few years after that. But I've worked in the energy space for pretty much my entire career. I started out in wind energy construction, climbing about 150 wind turbines, doing mechanical inspections on those. Worked in the solar field, combined heat and power, on-site generation, load management, and power distribution. So I've really kind of worked across the spectrum, master of none, but pretty wide experience across the energy and power space. And currently with Ramboll, I support our business development and project development, market activities across North America with a couple of our different groups, including our power division and data center waste heat recovery division. So I support, on-site power generation, helping clients figure out how to get access to power, what that process looks like, as well as looking at opportunities to recover energy, thermal energy from data centers and share it with the community. So kind of a couple different things that I work on in the data center space.
That is fantastic. I mean, you've really seen power kind of from all different directions, so you appreciate just how much how important it is in the current market as well. That is wonderful. Now, to get into this kind of power discussion, can you tell us a little bit more as well? What does it really take to interconnect a large-scale data center and achieve that reliable power supply? Because I think as we start to build out, these facilities as well, power is still very, very critical for this.
Yeah, absolutely. In the equation has kind of changed over the past 3-4 years, especially moving towards larger gigawatt scale facilities. So planning and procurement challenges for this scale are just really important. Looking at everything from reliability of design, interconnection, potentially behind the meter solutions. There's a lot of considerations that you have to make when you're planning and looking to actually build a data center and then interconnect with the grid. And I think we'll get into some more specifics, but right now it's procurement challenges, it's interconnection queue processes and timeframes to secure that, as well as looking at phased approaches, realistic ways to scale a facility, going from megawatt to gigawatt scale, what that looks like, and putting all those building blocks together. And there's nuanced pieces for every portion of that, but I think at the end of the day, it takes solid planning, working with folks who understand the process from start to finish, to interact with utilities, plan for load, really understanding the load profile of the data center that you're going to build, and ideally what tenant you might be working with, and what the exact demands on the grid will be for interconnection. And if you're going behind the meter or completely islanded, it brings an entirely different set of challenges that are somewhat new. And so again, it comes back to planning and understanding exactly what type of solution you're going to build and how that can be reliable enough to achieve the 3 nines percent uptime that you need at the service entrance, so to speak, for a data center. So a lot of challenges, a lot of changes in the past few years, and eager to dive into the details on some of these items.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, an aspect of this that comes to mind for me is this relationship between developers and, of course, utilities, particularly when we're talking about power. That relationship is very, very important. How can developers, utilities, but also regulators as well, kind of work together to create plans that data center operators can then, use as viable long-term power solutions?
Yeah, and going back to a point I just made, I think up front understanding the changing regulations. A lot of the utilities, the ISOs, are changing what it looks like for a data center to interconnect. So really being on top of current regulations and then that changing landscape. We're seeing that a few years ago, you could enter the interconnection queue and maybe not have a totally formalized plan. You could have a aspirational, we'd like to target XYZ for a development. I think what we're seeing now is that essentially starting almost day one, you really need to have a specific load profile for the data center that you're going to build. Ideally, again, that matches up with a tenant, a specific tenant and or operator, and what that profile looks like. The data center archetype, is it inference? Is it what are the specific power demands it's going to create? And taking that to those early conversations with utilities. We're also seeing, because of the proliferation of these gigawatt scale data centers, the load growth, which is really unprecedented in the industry. For many decades, load growth was basically zero or almost negative in some locations in the US. And so to actually have this huge spike is putting strain on already aging infrastructure. So we're looking at different items and different technologies that can help solve some of this instability caused by data center loads. Right? They're pretty volatile. They can move up and down quite quickly. So having those plans and plans in place as soon as you speak to a utility is really important, and with the regulators, because they're looking to see not just how much capacity you need, but how does it interact with their grid? How do they model that? How do they fit that in? How do they continue to deliver reliable operations? So the more detail you have, the faster I think you're able to move through that queue, and be in a position where you're actually going to secure power in the coming years.
That absolutely makes sense. Thank you. Now, another section, obviously, as you mentioned as well, there was quite a long stretch of time where power, even data centers, had kind of a steady growth. Now that seems to have gone very, very quickly, changed and become a lot faster now. What technologies or trends do you think are changing the industry from a power reliability perspective in this case?
Yeah, and to get into the weeds a little bit, grid compliance standards are changing. They're becoming more stringent. So, specific example, we're seeing things such as subsynchronous frequency oscillations being written into standards and implement, or being required here to be monitored on the grid in the future. So, there's specific technologies that can help rectify these oscillations and provide better power quality. So things such as battery energy storage, of course, which is known, and then other technologies like StatComs. I think we're going to see an increased use for these at the grid level, which is basically a dynamic response to reactive power. So there's different solutions that we need to look for to implement, and battery energy storage, StatComs being a couple of those, and using these and other technologies to, again, put a plan in place to work with the utility, identify any issues that could come down the road, and make sure not just on the client side, on the load side, but then interacting with the grid, that these two sources are playing together, that there's modeling that's done. There's a lot of advanced grid modeling, power modeling that can be done with the interactions between these loads and generation sources. And I think these technologies are probably going to become more standard, if not almost required, at a lot of the large sites moving forward.
Absolutely. I think that, as you say, not just standard but required is going to be something we definitely need to pay attention to for the future as well. Now, talking about speed, how is particularly speed to power in particular changing the way that developers are kind of approaching this marketplace?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think in the past few years we've seen there was definitely a speed to power rush, which in many ways is still happening. But certainly in the past few years, I think speed to power was top of everyone's mind. Going to conferences, talking with clients, that was just the constant thing. I think it's somewhat settled, and a lot of the developers and folks that we work with, and I think the industry kind of has a pipeline sort of figured out, probably through 27, maybe mid 28, on what the current project and implementation schedule could be. So I think there is a little bit of a slowdown on that, so to speak. But it's still critically important. I think the changes we're seeing in how important speed to power is, it's not just access to power, it's access to an implementable project. So are all the other pieces in place in addition to power that will lead to a successful outcome? And that's where I think up front, again, coming back to having the plans in place, where you understand what your project is going to look like. You've been through, you're going through the interconnection process, you're talking with the utility, regulators, community engagement, and you've kind of checked all of those boxes so that when you do have a project that has power, it is ready to move forward. And so again, I think some small changes there in the sense of speed, but the other thing that we're seeing is perhaps more of an increased focus on the first phase of projects or campuses that were built out at the perhaps hundreds of megawatt scale, and now it's how do we actually implement those plans to get to the gigawatt scale. We've allocated the space, we've allocated the campus design and gone through regulations, but to actually source the power they need in the timeframes they're looking for, provide on-site generation if that's a component of it, and scale up that system is kind of the next challenge. So I think we are starting to see a bit of a focus of that, of increasing campus size and focusing on existing sites.
Absolutely. I think particularly as you raise that scale up topic as well, this is something we're seeing across the industry. Scale out is established. We are now scaling up, and there's a lot of questions we have to ask around that. Obviously, something that does come to mind in this overarching conversation of power as a supply challenge instead is what role should integrated kind of early stage due diligence play in connecting things like grid access, permitting, water, infrastructure, and particularly design as well for data centers?
Yeah, I think in our experience, it's critically important. This is a pretty standard scope of work that we provide for clients, and we see it as being critical, not just on our side, but on their side as well, to making sure that they check every box they need to in order to move forward with the site. You'll start out looking at quite a few different parcels or locations for a potential data center site, and walking through all the diligence items in a specific manner, or proper manner, to sort those down and get to sites that can make it through to implementation is really important. And that picture's changed a little bit. Again, coming back to a few years ago, you could maybe just take a look on the map, do some GIS work and see how close are you to large transmission lines. Are you close to 345 kV? But that process has changed, and so we're always adapting our process to what are the current needs. What does it actually take to get these built? And so starting with things up front with power due diligence early in the process and making sure you're actually going to have a pathway to power, be it pure grid interconnection, on-site generation, bridging power, or some hybrid solution. You need to have that plan in place. And again, access to the typical things too: fiber, water, roads, community engagement. I think all those things are critically important, and really has to be done up front, especially as much as the landscape is changing all the time. It is a hyper competitive landscape. So you want to make sure that you've done your diligence properly. You know what your potential end users might be looking for, your end clients are looking for, and you're matching those things up as much as you can in the beginning of the process and front load it, so to speak. So yeah, I think it's more important than ever, especially with all the changes, the rapid development, and the changing landscape of technology.
That makes complete sense. Now, unfortunately, Michael, we are starting to run out of time, but in all of this discussion around power and data centers, I think we could talk on this for 2 years and still be only scratching the surface because things will change so quickly. For the future and for our audience, can you give us kind of your final thoughts? What should they really take away from this discussion? As well, how do they work with Ramboll if they have any questions as well?
Yeah, of course. We're happy to support clients across the spectrum. We work with everything from hyperscalers down through developers, neoclouds, co-locators, and really support the entire project lifecycle, cradle to grave. So we have engineering expertise, in-house consulting expertise, supporting environmental, water, design, from everything inside and outside the shell. So we're happy to support all phases of the project. We've designed about 15 gigawatts of data centers around the globe, and have supported the industry for decades. So it's really a core focus of ours. So anything we can do to help at pretty much any phase of that process, making projects more sustainable, doing the due diligence and ensuring that your projects get built, we're happy to team up and be a partner with you and deliver these projects. So yeah, feel free to reach out. We're happy to discuss and see if we might be able to work with your teams.
That is fantastic. And what a wrap up. Well, Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you as well to Ramboll for being a partner with us on this DCD talk. If you've missed any of the conversation, go ahead and watch this episode back on demand, as it will be available shortly. Otherwise, join us again next time on DCD Talks. More from the industry then. See you then.